Adjectives. Starting with A. Axiomatic. It is axiomatic that a whole is greater than any of its parts. Awful. I've had a really awful haircut. Awesome. Kevin's commandeered military vehicle had some pretty awesome firepower. Aware. He was acutely aware of the odor of cooking oil. Awake. I find it so difficult to stay awake during history lessons. Average. The average salary is correlated with the length of education. Available. Author and subject indexes are available on a library database. Automatic. You get an automatic promotion after 2 years. Auspicious. His career as a playwright had an auspicious start. Attractive. He surrounds himself with attractive, intelligent, or well-known people. Astonishing. Her first novel enjoyed astonishing success. Assorted. There's a bag of assorted sweets on the table. Aspiring. He came from an aspiring working-class background. Ashamed. I feel ashamed that I brought to you so much trouble. Arrogant. I've never met anyone so arrogant and opinionated. Aromatic. Their clothes were aromatic with the feast they had been preparing. Aquatic. Visitors can view a rich and colorful array of aquatic plants and animals. Apathetic. Young people today are so apathetic about politics. Anxious. He was a bit anxious about the safety of the machinery. Annoying. He's never more annoying than when he's trying to help. Annoyed. She was obviously annoyed that the man had happened along. Animated. She was seen in an animated conversation with the singer Yuri Marison. Angry. He was so angry that he began calling them names. Ancient. The origins of this ancient structure are lost in antiquity. Amusing. He related some amusing stories in his childhood to his children. Abnormal. The ship was blown off course by abnormal weather conditions. Able. We were able to watch the lions in complete safety. Ablaze. The main street was ablaze with lights in the evening. Abject. This policy has turned out to be an abject failure. Abiding. He is an artist with an abiding concern for humanity. Adequate. She didn't give a very adequate explanation for being late. Authentic. This is an authentic news report. We can depend on it. Adolescent. He eventually outgrew his adolescent interest in war and guns. Abaxial. The abaxial surface of a leaf is the underside or side facing away from the stem. Angelic. Sean is an angelic little baby, but Sarah is hell on wheels. Adjectives. Starting with B. Bulimic. It turns out that the patient is bulimic and has been abusing Ipecac for years. Basic. I really need to get some basic financial advice. Busy. We are so busy watching out for what's take time. Bustling. The city has become a huge, bustling metropolis. Bashful. We all know you to be a very bashful man. Burly. The farmer was a big, burly man with a red face. Bumpy. The fragile china survived the bumpy journey safe and sound. Brown. The normal supply of water has turned brown and unusable. Bunkers. If I don't work, I'll go bunkers. Broken. Don't walk on that broken glass with bare feet. Batty. He was batty. He asked for it. Broad. His shoulders were broad and his waist narrow. Bright. If you hang your clothes out in the bright sun, they will fade. Brief. A brief summary is given on a separate sheet. Breezy. She was a bright and breezy sort of girl, always laughing. Brittle. She gave a brittle laugh and turned away. Breakable. I have something breakable in this bag. What should I do? Baffling. I was constantly ill, with a baffling array of symptoms. Boisterous. The children are very boisterous today. Brawny. The brawny big tree had cast a deep impression in my mind. Brave. I wasn't brave enough to tell her what I thought of her. Brash. He was wearing a rather brash tie. Buxom. When we call a girl buxom we mean that she is fat. Brainy. At school, Karen was always one of the brainy ones. Bicameral. The United States Congress is a bicameral body. Balanced. His future in the job is balanced on a knife edge. Balmy. It was a balmy night with a full moon and the city shone Picasso blue. Bald. He was short and bald and had a mustache. Benevolent. She believed in the existence of benevolent power. Biannual. I have to make a biannual report next Monday. Bacille. The infectious bacille disease is an acute and highly contagious disease, which damages mainly young chicken. Burdensome. The new regulations will be burdensome for small businesses. Buzzing. He switched off the transformer and the buzzing stopped. Burlesque. Hollywood was one of the last pure burlesque theaters anywhere. Bulbar. Incisions in the sclera and bulbar conjunctiva were stitched up. Beefy. He was a little on the beefy side, I saw, but far from gone to fat. Brackish. My brackish water tank is built into a wall. Bare. They wore shabby clothes and their feet were bare. Brisk. He goes for a brisk jog before work each morning. Beloved. She wrote daily to her beloved brother, Leo. Adjectives. Starting with C. Cynical. I think she takes a rather cynical view of men. Cooked. When the fruit is mushy and cooked, remove from the heat. Combative. Luckily, Mr. Clark has a combative, skeptical personality. Cute. What a cute puppy. Is it a he or a she? Cut. He was spitting blood from a badly cut lip. Curvy. This will give your text a curvy stroke effect. Curved. He had a long, curved scar on his right cheek. Comfortable. Their car was bigger and therefore more comfortable. Curly. If you have long curly hair, don't shave it off. Curious. Don't be too curious about things you are not supposed to know. Cumbersome. Although the machine looks cumbersome, it is actually easy to use. Cultured. His voice was cultured and unmistakably English. Cuddly. This cuddly baby doll comes with her own blanket and bottle. Cruel. I despise anyone who is cruel to animals. Crowded. We are all bunched together in the crowded elevator. Compassionate. He was allowed to go home on compassionate grounds. Crooked. You have to drive slowly on these crooked country roads. Creepy. There were certain places that were really creepy at night. Crazy. Are you crazy? We could get killed doing that. Craven. They condemned the deal as a craven surrender. Crabby. You are being crabby. Snap out of your bad mood. Cowardly. He despised himself for being so cowardly. Courageous. I do hope you will be courageous enough to publish this letter. Coordinated. The sound has to be coordinated with the picture. Competent. He was a loyal, distinguished, and very competent civil servant. Changeable. The weather is very changeable at this time of year. Concrete. They live on a great concrete warren of a housing estate. Certain. She arrogated to herself certain importance. Ceaseless. His ceaseless questions began to annoy me. Cagey. He was very cagey about what happened at the meeting. Cheeky. He was being cheeky, so I gave him a smack on the jaw. Contemplative. Her mood was calm and contemplative. Creamy. The chocolate mousse was smooth and creamy. Conventional. He made a few conventional remarks about the weather. Creative. She's very creative and always coming up with new ideas. Childlike. He believes everything with childlike simplicity. Chief. He told the chief officer to haul the ship off 4 points. Chemical. Scientists have produced a new chemical compound. Cavernous. It was quiet, too, every sound echoing around the cavernous dome. Cheerful. He felt bright and cheerful and full of energy. Adjectives. Starting with D. Deceitful. A deceitful peace is more hurtful than an open war. Decent. He seemed like a decent sort of fellow. Dynamic. She's young and dynamic and will be a great addition to the team. Dusty. It was high summer. The trees were dusty and the rivers were dry. Delayed. The plane is overdue and has been delayed by the bad weather. Dull. The house was dull, old-fashioned, and in bad condition. Dry. I need to change into some dry clothes. Decimal. The answer should be rounded off to 3 decimal places. Drunk. We found her lying on the floor, drunk and insensible. Dreary. She had spent another dreary day in the office. Dramatic. The announcement had a dramatic effect on house prices. Draconian. The legal limits on personal expression are draconian, but not very often invoked. Drab. Her personality was drab, earnest, and humorless, and her appearance calculatedly unattractive. Doubtful. It is doubtful whether the patient will last out this month. Domineering. He's arrogant and domineering and never listens to anyone. Dizzy. I felt dizzy when I looked down from the top of the television tower. Decayed. Pollution has decayed the surface of the stonework on the front of the cathedral. Divergent. An extensive area grew up in which widely divergent dialects were spoken. Disturbed. I was disturbed by all the people walking to and fro outside the office. Distinct. She showed a distinct lack of enthusiasm for the idea of becoming a mother. Dilapidated. They bought a dilapidated house when they got married, and are gradually doing it up. Dispensable. Since none of the 4 is dispensable, they are equally important. Disillusioned. As she grew older, Laura became increasingly disillusioned with politics. Disgusting. It's disgusting that there are no schools or hospitals for these people. Dishonest. I don't like him, and it would be dishonest of me to pretend otherwise. Dapper. I tried the next time with a very dapper man, all pinstripes, and umbrella. Dangerous. She walked home by herself, although she knew that it was dangerous. Damp. The corner of the classroom was damp where the roof had leaked. Damaging. Stress can be extremely damaging to your health. Exercise, meanwhile, can reduce its effects. Distraught. She's still too distraught to speak about the tragedy. Debonair. He was a handsome, debonair, death-defying racing driver. Darling. I know exactly what the poor little darling is suffering. Dear. My dear roommate, thank you for sparing my life. Adjectives. Starting with E. Eager. He was eager to get out of the ruck and distinguish himself in some way. Early. The Prime Minister may decide to call an early election. Exemplary. His tact was exemplary, especially considering the circumstances. Earthy. Michael has an earthy sense of humor, he likes rude jokes. Exasperated. She was becoming exasperated with all the questions they were asking. Equatorial. Both satellites pursue nearly circular, equatorial orbits about Mars. Exhausted. When your heart is getting exhausted to a certain extent, you are too weak to anger. Earnest. Robert is a very earnest young man, you can trust him. Easy. This was not an easy decision. It is, however, a decision that we feel is dictated by our duty. Eatable. Starchiness is abundant in their bulbs, some of which can be eatable as vegetables. Economic. She accused the United States of economic imperialism. Extroverted. He's very friendly and extroverted, so he should fit in quite easily. Educated. The public should be educated to use resources more effectively. Efficacious. It occurs to me that example is always more efficacious than precept. Extensive. Several of the crash victims had to have extensive plastic surgery. Efficient. He was efficient at his job and well thought of by everyone. 8. By the time she was 8, she could read Greek and Latin. Elastic. The trousers are held up by a length of elastic around the waist. Eastbound. The eastbound helix coiled against the sky like a giant concrete snail. Elated. I was elated that my second heart bypass had been successful. Extraneous. These questions are extraneous to the issue being discussed. Evanescent. We present a method to measure the evanescent field by Michelson interferometer. Evasive. The pilot had to take evasive action to avoid a mid-air collision. Essential. It is becoming almost essential for students to have a second language. Emotional. She went through a period of emotional adjustment after her marriage broke up. Ecological. The ecological effects of the factory need to be balanced against the employment it generates. Excellent. I'm sure you can make an excellent job next time. Excited. I'm very excited about the possibility of playing for England's first team. Entire. This statement must be understood in the context of the entire document. Earthbound. Avatar created a new planetary experience and an earthbound experience in 3D. Experienced. The task needs the skills of a suitably experienced engineer. Emollient. The central character is a deceptively emollient senior figure in a conservative government. Adjectives. Starting with F. Fuzzy. Some of the photos were so fuzzy it was hard to tell who was who. Flawed. Diamonds are still valuable, even when they are flawed. Futuristic. We pretended to fly to distant planets in futuristic spaceships. Foolhardy. They were very foolhardy to jump off the bus while it was still moving. Future. Lastly, I would like to ask about your future plans. Fatherly. Suddenly Jack smiled and slipped back into his fatherly role. Furtive. I saw him cast a furtive glance at the woman at the table to his right. Furry. You might see a group of these furry creatures in fields beside railway tracks. Funny. I overheard a very funny conversation on the bus this morning. Forceful. She has a very forceful personality which will serve her well in politics. Functional. Kitchen utensils should be attractive as well as functional. Favorite. My favorite place in the entire world is right next to you. Fumbling. I was fumbling with the key as I couldn't see where the lock was in the dark. Full. The classroom was full of activity, every child was busy. Frightening. It was a very unpleasant and frightening attack. Flamboyant. He's a showboat outfielder who's famous for his flamboyant catches. Frightened. Don't be frightened. We're not going to hurt you. Friendly. They were very friendly, but I quickly saw through them. Fretful. My baby brother is fretful because he is cutting his teeth. Fresh. Fresh orange juice should be refrigerated after opening and drunk within 3 days. Firm. The bridge provided a firm platform for the bungee jumpers. Far off. It finds her in a maximum security prison on a far-off planet. Frequent. His frequent depressions were the prelude to a complete mental breakdown. Freezing. They survived for 4 hours in the freezing water before they were finally rescued. Fitting. The award was a fitting tribute to her years of devoted work. Fantastic. It seemed fantastic that they still remembered her 50 years later. Fancy. It was packaged in a fancy plastic case with attractive graphics. Feline. She heard the prebendary's cat from next door weeping in feline fright. Fanatical. He was a fanatical and not a very competent golfer and a member of the Royal Bucks Club. Famous. Madame Curie was the only famous woman scientist in the world. Familiar. Complaints about school food have become a familiar refrain. Adjectives. Starting with G. Gloomy. I felt a gloomy foreboding that something was going to go wrong. Guttural. His guttural utterances are accompanied by erudite subtitles. Grounded. If I catch you smoking again, you're grounded. Do I make myself clear? Gusty. A sailing ship was passing, its mylar sails flapping in the gusty wind. Global. The General Secretary opened the Congress on global warming. Gullible. Plastic replicas of the Greek pottery are sold to gullible tourists. Gratis. It's gratis. That's free, for those unversed in Latin. Growing. There is growing opposition to the latest proposals. Guiltless. Yet he felt guiltless, breaking the promises he had made himself. Gratuitous. There's too much crime and gratuitous violence on TV. Guarded. The village was guarded by a ragtag group of soldiers. Grumpy. She let out a grumpy sigh and turned herself over to face the wall. Gruesome. The newspaper article included a gruesome description of the murder. Grubby. Traveling always made her feel grubby, no matter how luxurious it was. Gaseous. The walls of these are thick with blood vessels which absorb gaseous oxygen. Grouchy. Sometimes she is grouchy, but all in all, she is an excellent teacher. Grotesque. She has become a grotesque parody of her former elegant self. Gainful. It occurred to him that it might be easier to find gainful employment in Cornwall. Groovy. It was a groovy time across board in art, literature, and music. Gleeful. Her laugh was a gleeful, exuberant shout, her deep voice making it almost masculine. Grieving. Their daughter died over a year ago, but they are still grieving. Grey. The sky looks very grey. I think it's going to rain. Graphic. The exhibition traces the history of graphic design in America from the 19th century to the present. Grizzled. Pike was a grizzled combat veteran in charge of 15 green recruits. Gallant. With her arm around Lily's waist and their hands clasped, she felt gallant. Genetic. Scientists have found a genetic mutation that appears to be the cause of Huntington's disease. Gradual. As the strike went on, there was a gradual drift back to work. Adjectives. Starting with H. Hysterical. He became almost hysterical when I told him. Hypnotic. The beat of the music was strangely hypnotic. Hardy. Parsley is hardy and can be grown outdoors from the spring. Husky. He is a tall, stocky chap with a husky voice. Hostile. Many people felt he would be hostile to the idea of foreign intervention. Hushed. In hushed silence I stopped and listened. Hospitable. The local people are very hospitable to strangers. Horrific. He takes a ghoulish delight in reading about horrific murders. Horrible. The weather has been really horrible all week. Hopeful. He is not very hopeful about the outcome of the interview. Honored. He was honored with an award for excellence in teaching. Hurtful. Her comments can only be hurtful to Mrs. Green's family. Hurt. Movement can be painful when you've hurt your back. Humming. The computers were humming in the background. Homey. The restaurant has a relaxed, homey atmosphere. Humiliating. The party suffered a humiliating defeat in the general election. Humdrum. Zainab, whatever else she might be, was definitely not humdrum. Hedonistic. There was a shift towards a more casual, private, and hedonistic style of life. Humble. He was looked down on because of his humble background. Hulking. We can't move that hulking desk on our own. Hypnotized. Likewise, for nearly 3 years, the nation has been hypnotized by his saga. Huge. The huge machine was moved to its new position on rollers. Hungarian. The Hungarian people are warm and friendly. Hot. This coffee is not hot enough. Honorable. My father didn't think the acting was an honorable profession. Histrionic. She has a rather histrionic outlook on life sometimes. Hard-hearted. That man was not a downright, hard-hearted criminal by any means. Holy. He was regarded as a righteous and holy man. Horizontal. The plumb line is always perpendicular to the horizontal plane. Historical. I think the historical factor is overplayed, that it really doesn't mean much. Heuristic. Searching the text searchable parts you are interested in does not require a heuristic approach. Hissing. There was a hissing sound, and clouds of vapor were emitted. Halting. We carried on a rather halting conversation. Harmful. We should stop factories from producing harmful gases. Harsh. The weather grew harsh, chilly, and unpredictable. Adjectives. Starting with I. Itchy. My eyes sometimes get red and itchy in the summer. Irritating. She can be really irritating, but I try to ignore her. Irritable. He gets irritable when he's got a toothache. International. Many international conferences are held in Geneva. Internal. There was a rapid increase in internal trade. Interesting. It's an interesting job. The only snag is that it's not very well paid. Improper. He realized that it was improper for a police officer to accept gifts. Intentional. If their advertisements are shocking, this is entirely intentional. Intent. She was intent on pursuing a career in business. Intelligent. You're an intelligent woman, surely you realize by now that I'm helping you. Insubstantial. The pure-blood prejudice towards Muggle-borns is also largely insubstantial. Instructive. The inspection of the comparative figures is both instructive and startling. Instinctive. This can be instinctive and it can also be perfected and developed. Indelible. I have an indelible memory of that meeting with Anastasia. Incredible. The difference between the internet and reality is so incredible. Inconclusive. A biopsy was inconclusive and further surgery was advised. Incomplete. She had given me an incomplete list. One name was missing from it. Incompetent. 3 men had mounted an incompetent attack on Trent at Bacala. Insistent. She was insistent that they should all meet for dinner. Insignificant. The levels of chemicals in the river are not insignificant. Insidious. Organized crime has an insidious influence on all who come into contact with it. Iberian. The Roman past lay more heavily over the Iberian Peninsula. Insecure. He felt a bit insecure about being left alone. Inquisitive. Don't be so inquisitive, I'm not telling you what I've promised not to say. Impassioned. The director of the charity made an impassioned plea for help. Impartial. He was not an impartial witness because of his affinity with the accused. Ignitable. On the other hand, at greater distances, only those most easily ignitable will catch fire. Iatrogenic. It complicates 5 to 8% of pregnancies and is associated with iatrogenic prematurity. Imminent. The ancient abbey was in imminent danger of collapse. Adjectives. Starting with J. Juristic. Citizens and legal persons may perform civil juristic acts through agents. Jangling. Behind that quietness his nerves are jangling, he's in a terrible state. Jaded. I felt terribly jaded after working all weekend. Jejune. We were surprised by their jejune responses to our problems. Justifiable. Do you think war is justifiable in certain circumstances? Jihadi. It is one of a number of jihadi groups to have appeared. Juridical. The considerations here are not so much juridical as ethical. Jagged. The missile had torn a jagged hole in the side of the ship. Jocund. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. Juiceless. Hush. The boss is quite mad. He said he's going to fire any juiceless player. Jam-packed. Gloria's closet is jam-packed with designer clothes. Judgmental. He walked past her, giving her a judgmental frown. Jerking. Look, the old man's limbs are jerking. Jowly. His face was big and jowly and squared off. Jarring. There was a jarring note of triumph in his voice. Jordanian. The Jordanian leader is caught between both sides in the dispute. Jutting. He was a small man with a puffed chest and a jutting chin. Jilted. She has been jilted and I am trying to console her. Jaunty. You have to be both a jaunty cheerleader and a lithe psychiatrist. Joyless. Why does the person feel joyless sometimes? Jobbing. She employs a jobbing gardener to keep the garden tidy. Jet. A jet plane sheared the blue sky. Jammed. The enemy's radio was jammed during the war. Jokey. Dave was a sweet man, very jokey about everything. Jugular. They ripped open the jugular vein, releasing an appalling rush of blood. Jolting. Our journey away was nasty, jolting, and at times even violent. Juvenile. The increase in juvenile crime is a blot on our time. Japanese. She's very keen to learn about Japanese culture. Jumbled. Her thoughts were all jumbled together. Jocose. Dr. Daniel was a gleg man of a jocose nature. Jumbo. The jumbo jet is due to fly the hostages directly back to London. Jesting. Do not mind, he is jesting. Jumpy. She described Mr. Hutchinson as nervous and jumpy after his wife's disappearance. Jubilant. Liverpool was in a jubilant mood after their cup victory. Adjectives. Starting with K. Kinetic. There exist many sources of energy, both potential and kinetic. Kempt. I dreamt that my hair was kempt. Kuwaiti. Patriotic songs have long been a feature of Kuwaiti life. Korean. The title is a loose translation of the Korean original. Knowable. In principle, these constellations are knowable, and criminal behavior fully predictable. Killing. She found the idea of killing animals for pleasure barbaric. Kaleidoscopic. T.S. serial, kaleidoscopic exposures force us to follow its lead. Knackered. I'm too knackered to go out this evening. Knotted. She wore a scarf loosely knotted around her neck. Kenyan. Mr. Mellies was speaking at a Kenyan summit on the crisis. Kissable. Darling, you look so kissable tonight. Kurdish. He was due to stand trial for spreading Kurdish propaganda. Kaput. He finally admitted that his film career was kaput. Knavish. There was something quite knavish in the man's attitude. Kyphotic. The treatment of cervical kyphotic deformity is challenging. Keen. He is very keen to reach an agreement with the US on reducing long-range nuclear missiles. Key. Natural selection is a key element of Darwin's theory of evolution. Kashmiri. A Kashmiri separatist group claimed responsibility for the blast. Knee-deep. We shall soon be knee-deep in conflicting legal views here. Kind. He's a real gentleman, always kind and considerate. Keloid. There are two common clinical types of excessive scarring, hypertrophic and keloid scars. Klutzy. I am really klutzy on the dance floor. It's like I have two left feet and no rhythm. Knobby. During the day, I'd perch on a knobby redwood buff and toss pieces of bark into a bucket. Kindred. We immediately realized that we were kindred spirits. Keynesian. To understand Keynesian theory we have to return to first principles. Naughty. The new management team faces some naughty problems. Known. He became one of the best-known actors of his day. Knightly. Johnson is a knightly man who is never afraid of the evil force. Knitted. She pushed up the sleeves of her grey knitted cardigan and got to work. Adjectives. Starting with L. Loopy. You can get really loopy here and sing to your heart's content. Lyrical. She wrote an almost lyrical account of her childhood. Laudable. The recycling program is laudable, but does it save a lot of money? Lying. His idea of paradise is to spend the day lying on the beach. Labor-saving. There is a new emphasis on research and development of labor-saving machines. Luxurious. This is a luxurious car complete with air conditioning and telephone. Luxuriant. This stretch of land was once covered with luxuriant forest but is now bare. Loquacious. Kennedy had become almost as loquacious as Joe. Lustrous. They are lustrous in color, supple, light, warm, and comfortable to wear. Laughing. I became uncomfortably aware that no one else was laughing. Lacerate. His fingers were badly lacerated by the broken glass. Lush. They thinned out a stand to create a lush forest tomorrow. Lumpy. Sandra lay on the lumpy mattress, unable to sleep. Luminous. You may not be the most luminous of people, but as a conductor of light, you are unbeatable. Lumbering. A large, lumbering man, who fumbled through the ankle-deep water without grace. Lackluster. He ran a lackluster campaign for president in the 1992 primaries. Ludicrous. It was ludicrous to suggest that the visit could be kept secret. Lucky. If you're lucky enough to be different, don't ever change. Labial. Bingle, the color of the skin is and clear, the labial line is very good looking. Loyal. She has set a shining example of loyal service over 4 decades. Lowly. How should I know? I'm just a lowly employee. Low. My current level of job satisfaction is pretty low. Lascivious. She was startled into nervousness and unease by his lascivious eyes. Loving. Warm thoughts of love and regard to our loving teachers. Lenient. The police are sometimes more lenient with female offenders. Lame. The government should not waste money supporting lame ducks. Lacking. She felt nervous, increasingly lacking in confidence about herself. Labored. He developed asthma in his 60s. His breathing became labored. Leak-proof. Special safety concepts signalize a beginning failure of the leak-proof operation. Adjectives. Starting with M. Military. He led a military mutiny against the senior generals. Milky. She drinks very milky coffee with lots of sugar. Macabre. Gerald Bellamy recalls a rather macabre incident following this raid. Macho. He thinks it's macho to drink a lot and get into fights. Mindless. Cannon errs in labeling his critics as mindless pessimists. Miniature. He looked like a miniature version of his father. Muffled. There was a muffled explosion somewhere on their right. Multicolored. We keep a little multicolored kitten in the house. Minor. The birth of her son was a minor interruption to her career. Mad. She had an image of a mad scientist working in his laboratory. Meaty. She has written some wonderfully meaty parts for older actresses. Medical. Many patients are not getting the medical treatment they need. Maroon. She wore a long skirt and a baggy maroon v-neck sweater, one of mine she had appropriated and almost worn out. Mediocre. The club has become a graveyard for mediocre provincial bands. Mundane. On a more mundane level, can we talk about the timetable for next week? Meaningful. We have had meaningful negotiations and I believe we are very close to a deal. Maddening. She has a maddening habit of interrupting me when I'm talking to her. Made up. If you insist on wearing a made-up tie, wear a shirt with a turned-down collar, not a wing collar. Madly. 1 minute they're madly in love and the next they've split up again. Miscreant. Fugitive is pursued, caught, and punished for some miscreant act. Magenta. The three parts carry either cyan, magenta, and yellow ink or red, green, and blue ink. Magical. He can be magical, he can be comical, but only rarely does he occupy the middle ground. Murky. I don't want to get into the murky waters of family arguments. Munificent. I am so happy to get munificent birthday presents from my friends. Militant. A few militant members of the crowd attacked the vendor. Adjectives. Starting with N. Negligible. There is a negligible difference in meaning between these two words. Nigerian. The competition was won by a Nigerian student. Neighboring. The neighboring states are feuding over the rights to the river. Nasally. Do you think they're depressed or just nasally insensitive? Notorious. The accident happened on a notorious black spot on the A43. Nauseated. She could not eat anything without feeling nauseated. Neighborly. Tomorrow afternoon, he concluded with neighborly zeal, he would bake a meatloaf and take it over. Naive. She was very naive to believe that he'd stay with her. Nonpartisan. Voters seeking nonpartisan information on the issues and candidates' stands can access thousands of websites. Nigh. Music is the art which is most nigh to tears and memory. Oscar Wilde. Noisy. There was a really noisy table behind us celebrating someone's birthday. Nativistic. The nativistic movement refers to the host culture's reaction to the impact of another culture. Nonchalant. He looked nonchalant enough as he strolled along the Bayswater Road, but inwardly Creed was a mess of nerves. Nefarious. He was universally feared because of his many nefarious deeds. Narrow. His specialization is too narrow to be of interest to more than a handful of students. Nasty. She played a really nasty trick on me. She put syrup in my shampoo bottle. Nearby. We dumped our bags at the nearby Grand Hotel and hurried towards the market. Natural. She was a wonderful mother to both her natural and adopted children. Nervous. The young nurse was very nervous when she assisted at her first operation. New. The committee proposed the creation of a new chair of Portuguese for the university. Naughty. He has the ability to be such a naughty guy and can be stronger more as well. Neonatal. Neonatal convulsion is an uncommon problem but one that is potentially serious. National. The district unilaterally proclaimed its independence from the national government. Needle-like. The Pacific viperfish has jagged, needle-like teeth so outsized it can't close its mouth. Noxious. The stench of damp that enveloped her was noxious, she tried to take short breaths. Nebular. He proposed the nebular hypothesis and added a famous phrase: creation is never complete and it is ever going on. Adjectives. Starting with O. Overwrought. Clara was tired and overwrought after all the problems of the last few days. Obliging. They were not as obliging as she was about disappearing before the weekly workshop. Overt. We found few examples of overt harassment among our sample of professionals. Occupied. The army is making a well-phrased withdrawal from the occupied country. Oaken. A couple of bullets split the heavy oaken door before it shook under the onslaught of the enemy ram. Overrated. The allegedly good baseball weather is overrated, especially at night. Obtuse. Maybe I'm being obtuse, but I don't understand what you're so upset about. Offside. Gloucester was offside at the ruck and Barnes kicked the goal. Overjoyed. She was overjoyed when the doctor told her that her newborn baby is healthy and normal. Omnipotent. Police culture is omnipotent is structuring such views of critical research. Overdue. We welcome this announcement and think it's long overdue. Overcooked. The potatoes were a little overcooked, but delicious all the same. Obdurate. A third group was obdurate and still wanted to wait and see. Opaque. The story is convoluted and opaque, often to the point of total obscurity. Overconfident. He proved overconfident on the witness stand, misremembering a key piece of evidence. Oval. The plant has oval green leaves marbled with brownish purple. Objective. Try to be objective if you want to spend your money wisely. Opportune. This would seem to be an opportune moment for reviving our development plan. Outstanding. These are the prizes given for the most outstanding British theatrical performances of the year. Outrageous. Newspapers publish these outrageous stories because they know what their public wants. Oblate. The Earth is an oblate spheroid, a sphere with flattened poles and a slight bulge the equator. Obedient. He was very respectful at home and obedient to his parents. Oafish. The bodyguards, as usual, were brave but oafish. Obstetrical. To investigate the liquid resuscitation in approach to the treatment of the obstetrical hemorrhagic shock. Odious. Herr Schmidt is certainly the most odious man I have ever met. Observant. An observant shop assistant had remembered exactly what the man was wearing. Occluded. During both periods, occluded accesses were directed to surgical thrombectomy. Obsequious. She is almost embarrassingly obsequious to anyone in authority. Adjectives. Starting with P. Puzzling. This whole business is very puzzling. There is a lot more to it than meets the eye. Puzzled. Harry was puzzled that Nicholas didn't seem to recognize him. Putrid. When the wind was wrong, the putrid stench was wafted up across the fields. Pushy. They are materialistic and pushy, motivated by acquisition, competition, and getting ahead. Purring. The plump ginger kitten had settled comfortably in her arms and was purring enthusiastically. Purple. She had a purple dress with a silver-white necklace. Pure. How can I believe that there is still pure love in this world? Puny. They laughed at my puny efforts at rock climbing. Pungent. I sat down to a cup of wonderfully pungent Turkish coffee. Punctual. We can guarantee the punctual arrival of the armored cars in foggy weather. Pumped. Air can be pumped into the diving suit to increase buoyancy. Puffy. Many air travelers suffer puffy ankles and feet during long flights. Public. Most children go to public elementary and secondary schools. Psychotic. Most of the psychotic episodes experienced by people using halcyon involved high doses for extended periods of time. Psychedelic. Fashion designers look back to the 1960s with dazzling psychedelic prints. Prudent. It is always prudent to start any exercise program gradually at first. Proud. I am not proud, also not commit tomfoolery, is tired of all depend on. Protective. British industry was sheltered from foreign competition by protective tariffs. Proper. We need to carry out a proper evaluation of the new system. Profuse. East Indian evergreen vine cultivated for its profuse fragrant white flowers. Profitable. The company remains moderately profitable, but it is not making as much money as it should. Productive. We had a very productive meeting. I felt we sorted out a lot of problems. Probable. The probable cause of his death is traceable to an incident in 1724. Private. It was a private conversation and I don't want to go into details about what was said. Pristine. He wore a charcoal gray business suit, with a pristine white shirt and maroon silk tie. Passionate. They were locked in a passionate embrace on the station platform. Partial. The general has ordered a partial withdrawal of troops from the area. Adjectives. Starting with Q. Quaternary. The present invention relates to a quaternary chrome series catalyst for ethylene trimerization to prepare 1-hexane. Quotidian. There's nothing quite like a real train conductor to add color to a quotidian commute. Quartic. In fact, this rational quartic spline is the successful generalization of the quartic polynomial spline. Quintuple. Quintupled sales with a workforce reduced by 1/3 would seem to brook no argument. Quizzical. Blanche looked at Lancaster with a quizzical smile and did not say anything for a full 10 seconds. Quantifiable. Your company discloses quantifiable targets and achievements on green purchasing. Quixotic. Jesse Jackson ran a quixotic campaign against Michael Dukakis in 1988. Quantized. The assessment of the work could both be quantized and qualitative. Quiescent. Many strikes were headed by groups of workers who had previously been fairly quiescent. Quirky. Brave personal sacrifices are juxtaposed with quirky moments. Coterie. Most coterie women cover themselves, including their faces when they appear in public. Quadric. A new ranging method based on quadric difference frequency is presented. Queer. It's queer that he managed to bluff his way through all the difficulties. Quiet. Everything was quiet, aside from the occasional sound of a car in the distance. Quartering. He swam quartering upstream, but still was swept downward rather faster than he had expected. Quirked. The corners of his mouth were quirked up when I told him the good news. Quintic. Center conditions and bifurcation of limit cycles at the infinity for a class of quintic polynomial systems were studied. Quasi. The reasons why the quasi-velocity spectrum is not appropriate for calculating blasting vibration are demonstrated. Quicksilver. In private his quicksilver manner can charm colleagues or just as quickly destroy them. Quarreling. The quarreling couple stood in the sitting room, eyeball to eyeball. Quickset. With the quickset labels, easy to inquire about information. Queenly. Why couldn't a girl be queenly, and give the gift of herself? Quivered. And now the pace slowed, leaf by leaf rose, quivered erect, and slowly descended. Quadruped. Improving the related performance indicators according to the specific quadruped graph interval. Adjectives. Starting with R. Radical. The way we work has undergone a radical transformation in the past decade. Ruthless. Politicians dress up their ruthless ambition as a pursuit of the public good. Rural. The informative asides about rural life make this wine guide rather special. Rainless. The utility model can be widely used in damp and rainy or dry and rainless environments. Radioactive. The consequences of the radioactive leakage may not become apparent for a generation or more. Runny. The woman's dark like runny chocolate, her skin all smooth and beautiful. Rundown. Help Rebecca refurbish a rundown castle and turn it into a pizza palace. Rude. The manager rebuked the salesgirl sharply for being rude to customers. Ruddy. His eyes were an astounding blue and his complexion was ruddy from a life spent mostly at sea. Rubbery. Alan had backed away until he'd felt the rubbery darkness looming behind him. Racemose. Thermosize having trifoliate leaves and yellow or purple racemose flowers. Rakish. He looked as if he had glued the rakish beard onto his solemn face. Royal. The royal family is insulated from many of the difficulties faced by ordinary people. Rowdy. Our fans may be a little rowdy, but they don't throw things. Racist. The singer deliberately courts controversy with his racist and sexist lyrics. Round. Knead the dough lightly, then shape it into a round loaf. Rough. I can give you a rough estimate of the number of bricks you will need. Rotund. Mrs. Butler was sitting in rotund complacency at the foot of the table. Rotten. He is a willing horse, but he always seems to get the rotten jobs. Ravenous. The ravenous appetite for fossil fuels traces partly to an economic stimulus program in 1998. Rotating. All the light bars were turned on, which filled the room with these rotating beams of light. Rosy. Letters to relatives in Europe painted a rosy picture of life in the United States. Roomy. Rob DeGraff ditched his roomy house and 10,000 square foot lot for a row house with a patch of yard. Rainy. We had 3 rainy days on holiday, but otherwise, it was sunny. Reborn. The Star was reborn in 1941 with a new format and a renewed sense of purpose. Adjectives. Starting with S. Silly. It was silly of Grace to take offense at our innocent remarks. Silky. Despite their silky passing, Forrester was able to score twice and kill them off. Small. The place has rapidly developed from a small fishing community into a thriving tourist resort. Smarmy. He's been criticized for his smarmy behavior when interviewing celebrities. Silent. The silent majority of supportive parents and teachers should make their views known. Sick. Your job won't take care of you when you are sick. Your friends and parents will. Stay in touch. Shy. Although he's shy, it certainly hasn't impeded his career in any way. Shut. The lift won't move if the safety gate isn't shut properly. Smug. Theirs was a correction of smug Victorian concepts, a crusade sprung from reactive energies. Snappy. The magazine will be launched in September with a snappy new design. Shrill. Shrill voices on both sides of the Atlantic are advocating protectionism. Showy. The bottom half is a counterpoint to the showy fecundity of the top. Short-term. Short-term securities can also be held as part of an investment portfolio. Short. Life is short. There is no time to leave important words unsaid. Shoddy. He called for checks to discover whether corrupt officials are being bribed to connive in shoddy construction. Shocking. Photographer Weegee shot to fame with his shocking pics of New York crime in the 30s. Snoopy. He instructed his staff to refuse all interviews with the Snoopy columnist and refer all questions to himself. Snotty. His kid sister had always been fresh and snotty, tough as anybody in the family. Shocked. Jack was so shocked that he had to be calmed down by his wife and son. Shivering. I was already shivering with cold, but when I tried to walk faster my heart pounded unpleasantly. Shiny. Magpies are attracted to small shiny objects which they carry away to their nests. Sharp. The famous writer is still sharp in thought though he has attained the age of 92. Soft. In such a soft and warm season, please accept my sincere blessing and deep concern for you. Soggy. The oilskins grew clammy and soggy on the inside from our condensing sweat. Adjectives. Starting with T. True. Be true to your work, your word, and your friend. Typical. It's a typical country estate with a large house for the owner, farm buildings, and estate workers' houses. Tantalizing. The book gives us a tantalizing overview, taking advantage of the subject matter at its most sensual. 2. Two persons cannot long be friends if they cannot forgive each other's little failings. Twin. The twin sisters are so much alike that it is almost impossible to know one from the other. Turbulent. Otherwise, a decreasing fraction of the flow would be turbulent, and, for example, self-preservation could not occur. Tubby. He was short and tubby and amiable with an odd little toothbrush mustache. Truthful. The public has a right to expect truthful answers from politicians. Tenacious. As a reporter, David was tougher and more tenacious than the other three. Trusty. The latest update to your trusty old word processor can barely keep up with your keystrokes. Trustworthy. Those who advocate total manipulation urge that a trustworthy mode of communication is always open to cheating. Trusting. You are too trusting. It's one of the hard facts of life that not everybody is as honest as you are. Truculent. Managers of existing systems reacted to these proposals with truculent hostility. Troubled. Although a very religious man, he is still troubled by occasional doubts. Trivial. The quarrel was only about a trivial matter, but it was years before they made it up. Trite. I know it might sound like a trite remark, but mothers usually know best. Trifling. They themselves face no more than a trifling penalty if caught. Tricky. The company's had some tricky problems to negotiate in its first year in business. Triangular. There is a small triangular park behind it and the crowd may have spilled out from the Great Hall. Tremendous. This book was the outcome of a tremendous amount of scientific work. Treasured. This pen that my grandfather gave me is one of my most treasured possessions. Adjectives. Starting with you. Uttermost. In this uttermost touch, he expresses all love that he can express. Utter. The meeting was a complete and utter waste of time. Utopian. His ideas on equality are viewed as utopian in the current political climate. Utilized. Minerals can be absorbed and utilized by the body in a variety of different forms. Useless. He realized that their money was useless in this country. Ulcerated. She had lain in bed for so long that her shoulder blades had become ulcerated. Useful. It would be useful if you could nail down the source of this tension. Used. Register is the term commonly used to describe different levels of formality in language. Usable. The refinery turns crude oil into usable products such as gas and tar. Ulterior. He claims he just wants to help Lisa, but I suspect he has an ulterior motive. Urban. With bonfires outlawed in urban areas, gardeners must cart their refuse to a dump. Uptight. He's an uptight devil, only interested in giving orders and having them obeyed. Ulcerous. The surgeon opened the abdomen and, after examining it carefully, found an adhesion of the ulcerous part to the intestinal loops. Upset. My best friend tells me that I am silly to be upset about this. Ultrasonic. A new intelligent ultrasonic power meter with a large measuring range was developed. Upright. He was an upright and noble man who was always willing to help in any way he could. Uppity. Don't be so uppity. You do not think we're good enough for you? Upbeat. The senator took an upbeat view of the Republicans' chances in the next election. Umbrageous. They have not been as umbrageous in demanding their territory back. Unwritten. We have unwritten rules about what kind of behavior is considered normal. Unwitting. This has turned drug regulators into unwitting protectors of drug companies. Unable. She was unable to keep up the pretense that she loved him. Unlimited. The daily tariff includes accommodation and unlimited use of the pool and gymnasium. Ultra. The Clarence research team successfully created 2 ultra-effective products. Ultimate. The ultimate cause of what's happened seems to have been the advertising campaign. Ugly. An ugly shopping center stands across from one of the few buildings with character. Unspoiled. They come to enjoy the unspoiled environment, the bright blue skies, and the fresh snowfields. Adjectives. Starting with V. Valiant. Tar threw himself in front of a train in a valiant effort to save the child. Vulgar. He was a vulgar old man, but he never swore in front of a woman. Valvular. I told him that in my opinion, he was suffering from valvular disease and that there was probably considerable dilation. Voracious. He was a voracious reader with a compulsion to finish everything he started. Veridical. How can we take their experiences as veridical reports of the afterlife? Voluminous. The FBI kept a voluminous file on Pablo Picasso. Verified. Lawrence apparently has no wish to be verified by Rock's steering committee. Voiceless. The voiceless bilabial stop in pin and the one in spin are in complementary distribution. Vagal. While this is commonly agreed upon, the vagal innervation of idioventricular pacemakers is not. Vivid. On Wednesday night I had a very vivid dream which really upset me. Vainglorious. It is very vainglorious for you to think that the truth is on your side. Vivacious. He married a vivacious girl called Sarah who he met at university. Versatile. I found the Vulcan to be a highly versatile jacket great for hill walking, spring skiing, and everyday use. Valorous. Its movements are short and small, but fast and valorous, and have the forceful and imposing manner. Vital. The President said the agreement would allow other vital problems to be dealt with. Visible. Kim received the news without showing any visible signs of emotion. Valued. The region is valued for its coal and vast electricity generating capacity. Vacuous. They were at the opposite pole from the self-important, vacuous management. Vocal. He has been very vocal in his criticism of the government's policy. Vacant. They may headhunt her for the vacant position of executive producer. Verdurous. The verdurous mulberries remember the first time she went picking mulberry leaves. Adjectives. Starting with W. Willful. He dressed like a willful teenager, favoring jeans so tattered you could see his boxer shorts through them. Wry. He gave her a wry look, something between amusement and regret. Wrong. Of course, I was wrong, it would be hypocritical to pretend otherwise. Writhing. He and 4 other senators were writhing in the glare of unfavorable publicity. Withering. Rodden had also adopted an increasingly withering view of his colleagues. Wretched. I felt so wretched because I thought I might never see you again. Wrathful. She was exceedingly wrathful and struck at Histwood, who dodged. Worthy. This subject is intrinsically interesting and worthy of study in its own right. Wondrous. It is full to the brim of a wondrous liquid, which will bring abundance into your life. Worthwhile. The teacher recommended some really worthwhile novels to his students. Worthless. I'm glad that Alice has finished with that worthless young man. Worst. Rubbing this special cream into the insect bite will help to take away the worst of the pain. Worse. The conditions they're living in are worse than we thought. Worrisome. The traveling burglars are worrisome because they are hard to catch. Worried. I was worried that it might be too difficult for me, but I found the contrary. Worn. Traditionally, white flannels are worn when playing cricket. Worldly. We generally promise each other all our worldly goods. Workable. In short, a spreadsheet can provide a workable method of record keeping. Wailful. Many people came to console the wailful widow. Wordy. Using the active voice helps you be direct and keeps your sentences from being too wordy. Woozy. I couldn't stand on my left leg and my head was woozy from hitting the ground. Wooden. Gradually pour the liquid into the flour, working it in carefully with a wooden spoon. Walkable. With gas at $4 a gallon, there's never been a better time to live in a walkable neighborhood. Wandering. Her mind seemed to be wandering and she didn't recognize us. Wan. He managed to open his eyes now and give her a wan smile. Wakeful. I am eager and wakeful, I am a stranger in a strange land. Adjectives. Starting with X. Xylographic. I am grateful to my friend, James Eben, for making available his Tibetan copy of the autobiography so that I was able to compare it with my own xylographic copy so old and worn. Xylem. The primary cambium is found in the stem and root between the phloem and xylem cells, and by division gives rise to the secondary phloem and xylem in woody dicotyledonous plants. Xylan. The changes in the molecular weight distributions of xylan during enzymatic hydrolysis have been investigated with gel filtration chromatography. Xiphoid. All children were measured for their sternum's length from the jugular notch until the top of the xiphoid process. Xerotic. It improved some of the subjective symptoms of xerosis, the clinical xerotic severity score, and dermoscopic appearance. Xerophthalmia. Scientists want to investigate the relation between xerophthalmia occurrence and smut contiguity. Xerophilus. Leaf structure of Rus chinensis in karst area is studied by paraffin sectioning and electron microscope, and some xerophilus structures are found in leaf under water stress. Xerography. A machine for photographically reproducing written, printed, or graphic material, especially by xerography. Xerographic. The principle of color generation and the theory of optical system design in color xerographic copiers are briefly described in this paper. Xeric. I saw fear in their faces because they didn't know what the xeric was going to be. Xenophobic. We should not be quite so narrow-minded, blinkered, and xenophobic about the rest of the world. Xenophobia. We ourselves were unaware of the dimensions of this new xenophobia. Xenomorphic. Its presentational feature is the development of structure and enrichment of granule xenomorphic sulfides. Xenogenesis. The in situ leaching is a new advanced technology of mining uranium, being used to mining exogenetic and xenogenous unconsolidated sandstone uranium deposits. Xenogenic. The volume of the bone grafted and the extent of the periosteum being stripped seem to be important whether xenogenic bone graft would be successful or. Xenogenic. Allogenic or xenogenic neural transplantation has yielded some results, but it is still used in the research phase of animal testing, which is difficult for clinical application. Xenogamy. We consider that the limitation and dependence of xenogamy are important factors among the factors influencing the seed set. Xenobiotic. The overall phenotypic expression of different xenobiotic metabolizing enzymes in colonic carcinomas is complex. Xebec. Xebec, with its distinctive graceful look, is a good all-around ship that can be used in multiple roles. Adjectives. Starting with Y. Yummy. You can then put it in a yummy salad or add it to risotto if you fancy something a little hot. Yuletide. For one thing, it was hot and sunny and not at all the weather she had associated all her life with Yuletide. Yugoslavian. The international community is also divided over independence for the former Yugoslavian Republic. Yugoslav. The shelling started despite promises by Yugoslav army generals not to attack. Yucky. I was fed up with the yucky moldy silicone around the edge and reckoned a proper job should be done on it. Yowling. Simon was loose on the racetrack, yowling, and tooting to himself, and let all beware who saw him come. Youthful. The experience of our side and the youthful determination of the other balance each other out. Youth. We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future. Yours. Time is luck. So don't waste it living someone else's life, make yours count for something. Fight for what matters to you, no matter what. You are the greatest enemy if you are a coward, but if you are brave, you are your greatest friend. Youngling. I hope the youngling can experience the mystery and oddness from the ocean. Youngish. He was a very kind, youngish, amiable scholar of great distinction, and power in the university. Younger. The good thing about these younger players is that they are not carrying any excess baggage from less successful times. Young. When I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I am old, I admire kind people. Yonder. I would have thee betake thyself to play, and leave me to speak with him that comes yonder. Yon. Being a wise person, Yon can distinguish between right and wrong. Yogic. What had happened, for example, to the yogic principle of ahimsa, non-violence? Yodeling. I feel like singing, warbling, yodeling to Mr. B and the Duke. Yippee! My sister's face lit up at the sight of the Christmas tree. Yippee! She cried. Yielding. The seating was low and yielding, the decoration largely subordinate to a vast abstract oil painting on the longest wall. Yiddish. It may well be this bleak prospect that has spawned the flurry of books about Yiddish in recent years. U. The huddled figure shambled alongside the yew hedge towards the wicket gate. Yesterday. I love you more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow. Adjectives. Starting with Z. Zymotic. According to the experiment result, the fluidized drying method is suited for the drying of zymotic orange peels. Zygotic. The nucellar embryo suspensor, its development passed through the similar stages of the zygotic embryo. Zygomatic. As would be expected, the predator species preserving the more intact skulls also preserve the highest frequencies of the zygomatic process. Zoonotic. The patient was treated medically and released without further consideration of potential zoonotic disease. Zoological. The significance of wild zoological garden is expounded, and problems appeared during its development and its relative countermeasures are raised. Zonked. Bobby wanted to stay up to watch the late-night movie, but he zonked out 5 minutes after it started. Zonary. The transverse probe is designed to be zonary, just like the longitudinal one, so they are uniform, and the workload is reduced. Zonal. The zonal closure system allows for independent adjustment of the toe box to transition between hike and climb modes. Zombie. I put up the antenna. The zombie watched me from behind his clutter of uncovered food. Zoic. Before the invention of spin technology, zoic fur was mainly material. Zoetic. Horses have degenerated to the tame animals in the zoo, as well as zoetic toys in children's eyes. Zodiacal. On the other hand, these zodiacal signs grant in life a large dose of vitality as well as a fine physical shape and a strong, healthy constitution. Zippy. The music grew as two streams converged: operetta with its old world romance and vaudeville with its zippy comedy and thoroughly popular roots. Zionist. The limited funds of the Zionist movement made it unable to afford such a policy on a massive scale, though some steps in that direction were taken. Zingy. This lively wine has been carefully crafted to show the great length of flavor with refreshing, zingy, and lively acidity on the finish. Zing. We want to put more zing into our advertising. Zinkic. It is the manufacturer that a major casts model of the shoe of zinkic radical alloy, aluminum radical alloy. Zimbabwean. Local media reports say the cargo includes ammunition, mortars, and rocket-propelled grenades for the Zimbabwean military. Zigzag. At this point, you have successfully made the first zigzag pattern. Just repeat the process until you reach your desired destination. Zoned. The privately owned land is currently zoned for residential use and private stables. Zesty. The zesty pumpkin pie recipe joins others already on her sites, like sweet potato salad with raisins and turkey with almonds and apricots. Zestful. Being active and zestful meanwhile, calm makes me feel that I am a little different from other ones.